concerning basic evangelism and cultural outreach, there's many things that you can say about this topic, but three things that I learned from my experience in China. Number one is that the gospel is very relational. And that's the model that we have by Jesus. God didn't just announce to the world his plan. He sent his son in flesh and blood in person. And so as you're entering a new culture, it's very important to remember, like, this is about relationships. Like, we're sharing the gospel, we're sharing our lives with these people. And so I found in my ministry that the people that accepted the gospel were also people that I had really invested in their lives, that I had shown them that I cared about them by inviting them to my home, by spending time with them, making meals for them. And so we cannot forget this aspect of the gospel, that we have to be in a relationship with these people. The second thing I want to talk about is that as the missionary, you are really the Christian example. And what I found in my work in China is that I was the only Christian example that many of these students had. They had never really met a Christian before. And so what I found is that, I was doing these things in my life. I was having Bible studies, I was inviting people to my home, and a couple years into my work, I stumbled upon some of my Chinese Christians in the campus having a Bible study with non-Christians, and I didn't know anything about it. And I talked with them about it later, and they're like, oh, well, you're a Christian, that's what you do, so we just assumed like that's what we're supposed to do also. So it's a pretty amazing thing to think that you're setting the tone for this church, like what these Christians, what their lives are going to look like. So it's very important to make sure that we are living a devoted life to God, a sincere devoted life, and as we do that, the new Christians will know, like, this is what it looks like to be a Christian. And the third thing I want to talk about in regards to evangelism is that a lot of times missionaries come into a situation overseas and they have this plan and they think, this is how I'm going to do it. And that's not always the best plan. And so what I learned was, on a daily basis, to really be listening to the nudgings of the Spirit, to what God would have in store for that day, because God has people that need Him, and He knows where they are, and you don't know anything about them, and He might be pushing them in your direction that day, and if you're not aware of your purpose in being there, of your mission as a Christian, then you might miss those opportunities completely. And one story I would share from my experience is this one day my wife and I were just traveling through the city, and we had our schedule, what we were trying to do, like we were shopping or something like that. And this guy came up to me on one of the campuses, and we were at this campus just to get on the bus. This is not my campus. And he started asking me about these foreigners, and I didn't really know what he was talking about, and so I was kind of short with him. And 3 times this guy came back to me asking me, we were staying here waiting on a bus, and 3 times he came back, and so finally I was like, okay, this guy keeps coming, I need to like engage him. And as it turns out, this man was looking for a teacher to teach him the Bible. Like, he had heard about this American, I didn't know this American, but an American that lived on this campus just to teach him the Bible. So here's this like Chinese guy kind of wandering around this city of 8 million people looking for a missionary, and here I was just, meeting him. And so like God had a plan for that day, and I ended up connecting with this man, and he was a doctor actually, a local doctor in China, and we connected and we had Bible studies for the next year. So it's not about you. It's not always your plan. God has these things He's orchestrating. He knows the hearts of these people. So we really need to be listening to what He's doing and be open to changing our schedule at any notice, because that's what's important. I think something that I would say to someone who's new to sharing their faith and a missions experience, when I went to China for the first time, I didn't have a whole lot of experience sharing my faith, particularly with people that knew nothing about God. I think a lot of times we can kind of intimidate ourselves by thinking it's like a debate that we're trying to really argue these points. But what I found is sharing your faith is sharing your life. I mean, it is talking with people about why you love God. And many of the people that became Christians when we were overseas, they would say to us that the Bible was interesting in the beginning, the story of God, the story of Jesus, but what was more interesting to them, that really got them hooked, was the fact that I personally believed the gospel. That I was an educated person, but that I believed the gospel. And that was really intriguing to them, because deep down people want to believe in God. They want to have grace. They want to be loved by our Creator. And so that's very important. So don't underestimate just the power of sharing your love for God and sharing your faith, that you believe unapologetically that I believe. And you don't have to defend it necessarily, but just the fact that you're sharing that is so important to the faith process for other people. So I think that's the first step, definitely as a new person, a Christian trying to share their faith. On the subject of do's and don'ts, I would say, as far as the do's, is do listen to the missionary that has come before you. They have a lot of experience, they know the culture, and they can share a lot of things with you that you might not understand, but it's very vital and important to the work that's trying to go on. And so in doing that, those missionaries will tell you the don'ts. They will tell you what not to do. My experience in China is going to be different than I think a lot of other countries, but I'll share a few examples from that time. We learned that it was very detrimental to the work to get political in our conversations. We are there to share the gospel of Jesus, and so the more that we engaged in America versus China conversations and like, oh, well, we believe this about this political thing, the Chinese will just associate us, everything that we were would be associated with America and Christianity like mixed together. So that was a negative thing. I wasn't there to sell them on America. I wasn't there to sell them on our president or our policies. I was there to sell them on the gospel. So definitely wanted to avoid any kind of political conversation that would cause conflict, because that's going against the whole purpose of us being there. Another thing, that we've talked about is just the relationships between teachers and students and the opposite sex. And there was situations that would arise where people didn't take that seriously, and they thought, oh, I'm pure in my intentions, and we actually had teachers that would get involved with students in relationships, and that would completely destroy any kind of mission work that they were trying to do, because now everyone perceives them as being this really bad person who's preying on a student, but they're Christians. And so if you can imagine, this is the only example of a Christian that these students have, and how terrible that would be to the gospel effort at that school. So obviously that would be some good advice. Don't ignore these things. And then finally, another example that we had, specific to the Chinese culture, is that Christianity is essentially illegal. And so there's some things that we just couldn't do, and one of those things was talk about Jesus or God in the classroom. And this was one thing is kind of a gray area. Some of the students were like, well, I'm going to do this anyway. Or some of the teachers were like, I'm going to do this anyway. And that would be very detrimental to their work. We have opportunities to share our faith outside the classroom. And so teachers that would choose like, oh, I'm just going to ignore the don't here, I'm going to ignore the school and talk about God in the class, they would be on a plane back to America very quickly, and so they would lose all the opportunities they could have had the whole year to share their faith. So while you may think a rule is stupid, or I don't need to follow this, I'm just going to be brave and do what I want to do, like there's reasons why the missionaries are advising you to do these things. So I hope some of these stories can help apply to some of the other places that we'll be going through the groups, but definitely do listen to your missionary. They know what they're doing. What was the other thing that I was going to say?